Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that. But we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you.
Discover a new path to wellness at Arizona Metabolic Health. Dr. Brian Lenskis offers advanced medicine and personalized care, treating the root causes of your health concerns, not just the symptoms. Whether you're seeking direct primary care, effective diabetes management, or medical weight loss, with a holistic approach, our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Visit ArizonaMetabolicHealth.com today to learn more about our innovative health solutions.
Hello, everyone. October is here. You believe that? Oh my goodness, it's the scary month where black cats and witches and goblins and all that kind of stuff. But we don't have to be afraid of the food. Stay away from those processed foods. And to help you do that, if you get a sweet tooth when all your kids are out trick-or-treating, Health Code's here for you. They have tons of recipes on their website, well worth going to check out. They do, the chocolate macadamia and the vanilla, and you can make it into all kinds of stuff. My favorite are the maple bars. Amazing. Just make a bunch of them, cut them up small. And when the kids are eating those terrible things that are making their teeth rot, you could have a healthy alternative. So Health Code, thank you so much. And my discount code with them is MedHealth, METHEALTH. Go check them out. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I have a great one. We had to get up early this morning for this one to make it work for both of our schedules. Martha Carlin, welcome. She is Biotic Quest. She's the one who really started getting me thinking about this and making me dive down this rabbit hole where my friends say there's no research. So maybe Martha will have a different opinion. So Martha, welcome. It's so great to see you.
Great to be back with you, Brian. I'm excited to talk about the microbiome.
Yeah, it's such a foreign thing. So people look at you like you're on Mars or something because it's hard. I think people don't want to believe all this stuff that's happening inside is all these little organisms. So tell people how you got interested in this and how your journey has progressed, because you've flown around the world. You've talked to world experts from Cuba and all these things and how much they're using. Maybe you can tell us that, and then some of the other uses that they're using with microbes that are pretty amazing.
So, maybe let's just start by the fact that we are about 2/3 microbial, which, people don't really, that's hard to wrap your head around. So in terms of cells in the body, 2/3 of the cells in the body are microbial and only 1/3 are human cells. And the microbial cells, our microbiome is like this incredible factory that is producing vitamins, hormones, neurotransmitters. A tremendous amount of these key neurotransmitters and hormones are produced in our gut and delivered, through that system into the body. And so, there are literally thousands and thousands of research papers on the microbiome. A lot of it, early stuff is kind of focused on looking for, who's the bad guy. And, let's get rid of that. But, as we've kind of come along the path, I've started to learn the system is really trying to solve problems with the ecosystem. But let me back up to how I got into this. My husband, John, was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2002. And my background was actually a business background, looking at business systems. I was an auditor, so trained to never take anything somebody tells you at face value, but examine the evidence yourself. And so I started down this path of trying to understand what's going on in the human body, because John was 44 years old, a healthy marathon running, athletic, never really done anything bad. And, we thought we ate a fairly healthy diet, but we didn't really know a lot about the food. And, as a runner, he was also a very high carb eater. They do the carb loading and all of that. So, the first place I started was looking at the food and the food supply and how we were growing our food, the chemicals that were used on them. And, sometimes I think in the low carb versus no carb versus whatever, that a lot of what's going on is what we've actually done to the carbohydrates and the food. And, it may not be the carbohydrates themselves, that are the issue, but it's the chemicals that have been used on them, the way they've been genetically engineered, and how that alters how it interacts in our body. But, I moved along that food path, and then 12 years into it, I read a book called Missing Microbes by Dr. Martin Blazer. And he was talking about the rise of chronic disease in the growing up in the age of antibiotics. And of course, that's our generation. We're the first generation to grow up with widespread use of antibiotics. And he was talking about the microbiome. I'm like, what is this microbiome? And it's the trillions of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live in and on our body. And they function as an internal pharmacy to maintain our health if things are in balance. But as we all know, things are not in balance anymore. And later that year, the first paper was published that showed you could divide the two types of Parkinson's. One has tremor dominance, the other has posture and gait. And you could divide those by the bacteria in the gut. And I was like, okay, Eureka, the gut microbiome is the general ledger of the body. And that's what's telling you what's going on with what you're eating, what's in balance, out of balance. And I quit what I was doing and founded a company called the Bio Collective. And we started collecting people's fecal samples, like the whole stool sample, and making that available to other researchers around the globe. So that actually helped me build a network of scientists and people who were really kind of at the forefront of this new field of studying the microbiome and connecting it to, really, it's connected to almost every major disease you can find. If you went to PubMed, you would find a body of research looking at the microbiome and its effect on those diseases. And it has an effect on how you metabolize drugs. And so, through that process, then we started doing sequencing and digging in and studying all of this, and started to look at what are some of the key areas where people have problems. And of course, glucose metabolism is one of those. But I was looking at Parkinson's, trying to help John. And I went to a research conference for Parkinson's, and they were talking about how the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins and actually pull them out of the brain of a mouse. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And so I came back and bought a book on mannitol chemistry and started reading that, and found in the first chapter of the book, there's just a handful of microbes that actually convert glucose and fructose into mannitol, which we don't use in a typical way, but I'm constantly learning. This week, I listened to an interview with a pediatric dentist who's been researching the microbiome, and he was talking about xylitol, which is another sugar alcohol, but he talked about xylitol, mannitol, and ribitol. And historically, back when we were living in caves, we used to eat these tubers, and they had xylitol, mannitol, and ribitol in them. And those sugar alcohols actually feed into a pathway that feeds energy into the mitochondria. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that explains why. I'll talk about my product in a minute, but that, people report having more energy with the product. But so we designed the product for John, just to help John. And he had some pretty significant improvement in his uniform Parkinson's disease rating score that was steady for 4 years until he had COVID. Unfortunately, he had long COVID, and he had a pulmonary embolism and actually passed away a year ago today. Um, but
Yeah,
my
gosh.
my whole journey was driven by looking for answers for John, and ultimately we ended up bringing the product to market, which is Sugar Shift, and we did a clinical trial actually in diabetes because it has a lot easier markers to measure what's going on. But it's also interesting that people with Parkinson's, about 40% of them have insulin resistance. So, oftentimes there's these overlaps in the metabolic pathway.
And Alzheimer's highly correlated also.
Also, yeah, they often call them like type 2 or type
Type
3
3 diabetics, yeah.
diabetes, where it's insulin resistance of the brain. And so in our clinic, so we have two publications now, and we had some pretty remarkable results. But one of the things I wanted to measure that people might not typically think about in diabetes is serum lipopolysaccharide. And we were
That
both at that low carb meeting recently, and um, LDL cholesterol is actually a buffer for LPS.
as is HDL cholesterol, right? So when someone's septic, this after the conference I read this, I'm like, oh shoot, I wish I would have known this. But I was reading about it, and it says because I was like, does it make sense? Because it was bothering me why some of my carnivore patients were having high triglycerides and low HDL and sometimes really high LDL. And you go, wow, that because so the lipopolysaccharides will do, and for people who don't know, these are the toxins from all these microbes, these 100 trillion microbes that die off in your gut. If their toxins leak across, you should just poop them out, really, right? But if they leak across, the issue is your body says, "Oh, these guys are bad, and they cause inflammation, they cause damage to the endothelium." So the LDL will actually convert from the big fluffy LDL, which your body makes, to the small dense LDL, which is highly correlated with the coronary disease. And same thing as HDL. If someone's septic, the HDL drops by 50% on day one, and then the LDL follows the next day. So the HDL is the real buffer. So when we see low HDL, that's a sign of metabolic disease. So when you see this, like what you're saying is like, and I didn't know you could actually measure the LPS or the endotoxin in the blood and look at the levels.
Yeah, so that was kind of one of my, because this is also not widely known, but endotoxin, if you went to PubMed and you just like pick a disease and type lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin plus diabetes plus depression plus Parkinson's plus Alzheimer's, there's all these animal models that use endotoxin to drive the symptoms in the animal model. And LPS endotoxin is also one of the main things used just in cellular models of inflammation. And so in our clinical trial, I wanted to measure the typical diet, fasting blood glucose, postprandial, insulin. We did HOMA-IR, which, isn't really done a lot in the US. We did triglycerides, and all of those improved it was a 90-day double-blind trial. HbA1c moved a little bit, but not much. We unblinded at the end of the trial and kept a smaller group on for another 90 days. And so at the end of 160 days, 180 days, there was a 14% drop in HbA1c. But one of the main things that dropped at 90 days was the serum endotoxin. And again, at that 180-day marker, it was almost down to zero.
Yeah, and we see that clinically, just changing lifestyle, where we'll see the insulin drop way before we see the A1C come down, but you're getting more insulin sensitive, meaning you need less insulin to keep your A1C at that same level. So if the A1C doesn't change, but the insulin cuts in half, I feel really good about that because I know you're getting more insulin sensitive. So the A1C is not the main marker necessarily because it takes time to see
It's a
that change.
it's a slow mover. And I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine who one of her clients has been on the sugar shift for a year, and he went to his, I guess, endocrinologist, and he had lost a bunch of weight, and his A1C had dropped 4 points in the last year. And the doctor's like, well, we haven't changed anything. Like, what's changed? And the wife is like, the only thing that changes is probiotic. But it's kind of like a marriage instead of, a first date. Because as you know, with diet and lifestyle changes, it takes time to undo what we've done over this long period of time. And so you have to commit to making the changes. And another thing that Sugar Shift does is it really helps people with the sugar cravings. And I think part of that is that shifting and reducing those gram negative bacteria that are kind of saying, feed me, Seymour. And so our second paper that we did was on the microbiome and the changes in the microbiome. And what we saw there was also, supporting the reduced endotoxin producers, the lipid A and the, components of the endotoxin. Um, and So, we could see that, but we could also see that the gut was moving back to an anaerobic environment. So our inside our body should be anaerobic. And what happens is, when it starts to shift and it becomes aerobic, so there's oxygen in there, then you get a number of these pathogens which survive in an oxygen rich environment. And something like bifidobacteria that's very important for our overall health. And they've shown in centenarians, they have more bifidobacteria. It's also important for brain health because it produces something called plasmalogens that are helpful for the brain. And what we did was return the gut back to an anaerobic environment, increase the bifidobacteria, so made that environment more hospitable to bifidobacteria and some of the, specifically the bacteria that can't tolerate oxygen at all, that are, the ones that are really important to us. And one of the key organisms in this formula is one called Lactobacillus reuteri. And I think we connected originally because you had interviewed Dr.
William Davis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Bill Davis.
Yeah, and I just
And
had him back on. It's worth listening to that one because we had a great discussion because he was actually blown away because for him, a lot of this was theoretical, like with acromancy. And I'm just like, here's my data actually looking at it with patients. And he was blown away. Like, wow, that's exactly what he predicted that would happen. And he go, okay, you know something about this stuff.
yeah, so I mean, Akkermansia is an interesting, there's a probiotic now out for that, and some people buy it and take it. I say be very cautious about that because um, it's a mucin degrader. And if you don't really understand what the gut environment is and whether there is sufficient food for it, it will eat your mucus lining. And it,
Especially if you're carnivore or if you're not giving right if you're not giving it some fiber. And that's why my talk in San Diego, I was like, are we missing this? And when I had it just inulin, all of a sudden I see the acromantia go up, I see the numbers look better. But you're right, you can have a high acromantia and you're not feeding it right, and it's detrimental to you.
yeah, it's eating you. So it's elevated in Parkinson's, it's elevated in MS. So I'm always, you know, when people with Parkinson's ask me, "Oh, should I take this microbe?" I'm like, "No, no, don't take this microbe." You have to be, cautious and be working with somebody who really understands, what's going on there. But the carnivore, I think, one of the things with carnivore that can really help somebody who's got a lot of inflammation initially is it removes all of that fiber. And so it will starve those pathogens. So you will get this improvement, but
and it shifts the Bacteroides firmicutes, right? It brings down the firmicutes, brings up the Bacteroides, and balances it out. So there's definite benefit, but long term we're looking, right.
Right. But, another kind of interesting piece of the puzzle is, people think, okay, there's no fiber in a carnivore diet. Well, if you're eating nose to tail, and I think a lot of people don't do carnivore nose to tail. They think, oh, okay, I'm just going to eat steaks and hamburger or whatever. You really need to eat nose to tail because it's those tendons and collagen, the connective tissues that are very high in hyaluronic acid, and hyaluronic acid is a fiber. And hyaluronic acid is actually one of the main components of the lining of the gut, the lining of our blood vessels, the lining of our brain. That's called the glycocalyx. And so that's also potentially one of the key benefits of the carnivore diet. If you're eating nose to tail, is you're getting more hyaluronic acid, which is helping to feed, that important lining. But what I started to, I'll say I did, Ben Azadi shared his microbiome data with me. And so I wrote a piece on it, kind of being a double-edged sword, because what I saw in there was an increase in the proteobacteria and some of these gram-negative bugs that actually do produce this endotoxin. And, that was a 90-day carnivore. He did get some interesting positive changes where he was getting more butyrate production. So that helps feed the lining of the gut. But, if you've got a lot of these endotoxin producers, then of course you're having to deal with a pretty heavy load of toxic burden. And so, fiber or certain types of fiber, like you were talking about the inulin, have, some potential benefits. One, in feeding the right bugs. Two, and actually having you feel satiated. So inulin can also help with, hunger. And we use inulin in most of our formulas, include inulin, and the sugar shift formula also has inulin as the primary source of food for those microbes that are kind of putting that system back that can convert those sugars.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and like you said, it's a society in there, right? They all need each other to work. So sometimes if you're missing one or two of those, you start having everything starts getting out of whack. And so when I look at one of the things that's a struggle, sometimes we'll see their microbiome doesn't look too bad, but then all of a sudden they have a lot of pro-inflammatory microbiome in there thrown in, and then they have leaky gut on top of that. So is it necessary to try to wipe out the bad guys, or do you just raise up the good ones and they kind of bring law and order back to the society?
Based on our study, you take we build our formulas as working systems, like a team that's coming in to kind of rework the factory, if you will.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, over time, it kind of kicks the bad guys out. It's kind of like bringing the police in, and then all the little crime starts to go away. But, that takes time. If you start using a lot of antimicrobial type things, you can start, most of those are indiscriminate. And so you lose the good bacteria too. And again, back to Martin Blazer's book, that's part of our problem in the first place. And I don't know if you've ever had Kiran Krishnan on, but he was probably ahead of the curve. Not probably, he was ahead of me, ahead of the curve. And his first product was Megaspore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
and
yeah, I know that one.
That's very beneficial. And he's actually doing a course right now for people, for practitioners, to understand kind of, let's not go and turn this into the killing fields, but let's start to understand how to modulate the microbiome in more positive ways. And I think bringing back a team that can act like the police is a part of that. And we went from that product, which is really our best seller and our kind of core product, but we've got about 20 teams that we've designed to focus on a lot of different issues that people are having. The most recent one we launched, which I think the timing is good for the crazy world we're living in, is called Perfect Peace.
Yeah, I have a patient. She was telling me, Doc, I love this stuff. Yeah, because it really helps to calm her nervous system down. Yeah.
And we knew it would work, but somebody who's got a Oura ring or a Whoop or something that's measuring stress level. My son actually took it the first week we got the bottles in, and he took it, and we have a post on Instagram where we show his day before, his stress scores going like this, and then he took the capsule, and it just evened out. I mean, it was kind of crazy. So I took it. I was coming back from San Diego. Actually, I was coming back from low carb, and it took me 36 hours to get back from.
Gosh.
I mean, it was the most ridiculous flight thing going through Chicago and ending up in Indianapolis and back in Chicago, and having to go 45 minutes away for a hotel, like all this stuff. And I took it on that, and I was like, that's the first time I've had a flight like that where I was just totally chill.
Yeah, so people can take it before a flight, or if they're afraid of flying, and there's so many things going to the MRI machine, things like that we could just help calm that. Because in what I do with low carb and metabolic health, the biggest evil that I face is chronic stress. That's a hard one, because you're chronically stressed and everything else follows suit. You can't sleep, you're upset with everyone, you want to eat sugar because it calms your nervous system down. So I find that if I can work with stress, like lowering that sympathetic tone, people do so much better. So any of these tools definitely are helpful.
Well, stress, I think, is also underappreciated. So stress also makes kind of a loop in the gut brain. So
Yeah.
there's a great book. I think it's an older book, but it's called Psychobiotic Revolution by John Cryan and Ted Dinan and Scott Anderson, I think. And it's pretty well written for the layman, but it really talks about this gut brain axis and what happens when we're under stress. We produce stress hormones, cortisol, and what that does is it feeds a certain microbial profile that then starts to drive us to produce more. So this really key connection between the microbes in our gut and the metabolites they're producing and our mental state is, also a field that has tons of publications.
Tons of data. When I looked at, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And that's why I started looking back at the short chain fatty acids. If you're not, because I read a study a while ago and I thought that was a weird study. Why did they even look at this? But they had college students and they had them do a shot of um, red wine vinegar a day and so they compared them. They were the experiment group, the other ones were the control group, and their stress levels were way lower. So, and then you look, I wonder why that would be. Now when I'm doing the research, you're looking like acetate, propionate, and butyrate. So how do you get a good source of those things, right? Butyrate's hard. The propionate is probably the hardest one, but acetate you're getting from acetic acid, and then butyrate, like beta hydroxybutyrate when we're in ketosis.
Eat more butter.
And you eat more butter, and you go, wow, that's kind of crazy. Because and why would, knowing the physiology, you start looking and say, why would, if I'm starving, why would I heal the gut lining first with butyrate, beta hydroxybutyrate, and feed the gut microbiome? Like, when you have limited resources and you say that's important, like take care of that, because your body doesn't do stupid things with the energy. And you go, wow, that's kind of interesting. So you say, well, why not just feed the guys who make those things? If we're seeing a huge correlation, and I think there's causation there with low short chain fatty acids and depression, anxiety, bipolar, and all these things, you go, well, if I can raise those up, either through dietary change is going to be beneficial. That's why Metabolic Mind, I think part of what they're seeing is the benefit of fixing the gut microbiome when you're cutting out the processed food and sugars and inflammation. So there's so much that we just don't know yet in this brain body. Because if you're stressed all the time, your body's saying, look, bad times are coming, slow the metabolic rate down, right? We want to slow it down. You don't, yeah.
So I have this, I'm going to say it's a, a bit of a theory because, we talk about ancestral diets. So I'm working on a project with a group in Australia with the, indigenous population from the Northern Territory who have a high level of heart disease and diabetes and a number of issues. And so and I was having a conversation with somebody else about ancestral diets for something we're doing for a Parkinson's group. And I was like, well, hang on a minute. Like, what's an ancestral diet for you may not be an ancestral diet for me. And so, in the process of getting ready for this study we're going to do using Sugar Shift and a product called Revasca that helps support the glycocalyx, I said, well, let me go look at what the ancestral diet of the Aborigines in Australia is. And it's a very seasonal diet. So, part of the year they're eating, kangaroos and blah, blah, and part of the year they're eating more tubers and berries and that sort of stuff. But when you start to look at the breakdown of the actual foods they were eating, they were specific foods that were feeding this glycocalyx, the lining of the body. So, and that is actually made of sulfated polymers. So it's chondroitin sulfate and keratin sulfate and the hyaluronic acid. And they were eating like seaweed and it's a kind of a long list of things, but then that has me thinking about like, whether, and even the Hadza, if you've looked at the Hadza study where they eat pretty much a strict carnivore diet part of the year. And then, during the wet season, they eat, honey and berries and tubers. Again, back to those tubers that have, probably xylitol, mannitol, and ribitol in them. And their microbiome shifts. So what happens is, something's going dormant and then you refeed it in the, a particular season.
So they can hibernate for a while without dying off, and then you just feed them here and there.
Yeah, well, so another kind of interesting thing about that is my chief scientific officer, Raul, who really helped me come up with all these formulas. He's was at Cal Poly for about 35 years as a microbial ecologist. And one of the things he discovered was inside of amber occlusions that were 30 million, 40 million years old, he could actually revive the bacteria that were inside them. And he built a whole collection of these revived bacteria. And there was a scientist at Hebrew National University who didn't believe, there was a lot of controversy over it. They're like, it's contamination. It's not true, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
And he came out and learned the techniques from Raul and went back and did some work on this microbe called Micrococcus luteus, which is on our skin. Like they find it in the Yanomami in South America, who are, an indigenous tribe that's relatively undisturbed. It provides UV protection and all the DNA repair, all kinds of interesting stuff. But they found it had something called a resuscitation gene. And so, and they can share these resuscitation genes. So like they can die off or, kind of go into a stasis. And then when the conditions are right, come back. And so, sort of back to those ancestral diets, it's like, we're not all the same. Our ancestry isn't all the same. So I've really been thinking more about what does it mean to eat an ancestral diet. I thought about that a lot with John because his ancestry was from the British Isles and Northern Europe. Well, that's a very different type and, probably is more carnivore based, but probably a lot of fish, fish and lamb and, a different kind of a profile and probably a different kind of a mineral profile in their water. They have bogs in Ireland that are very mineral rich. And that's another I would say another underappreciated thing, and probably improves with carnivore, because you are getting a nutrient dense diet with carnivore. And what's happened with a lot of our vegetables and our soil is the minerals have gotten bound up by the use of glyphosate. And so we don't have the mineral density, those micronutrients in the food that we would normally have. And even some of the cows that you're getting food from. I mean, I think there's a group in Utah. I met a farmer who has meat sticks, fermented meat sticks. I think it's called Proven. And he was having his cows tested against other cows and the mineral content. And it's really pretty interesting to look at that. So now that's actually making me wonder about, the carnivores you have who are having trouble in their microbiome. Could that be related to actually the sourcing of their meat? And is it less nutrient
Possibly,
dense?
and possibly more antibiotics, those kind of things. If you're eating
Yeah.
more antibiotics and it's interesting because, I mean, all these things, when I go back, I think, man, it's so weird because there's one nutty lady, sweet as can be, but flight attendant, she goes, doctor, I'm telling you, tell all your patients to take olive leaf extract because I used to get sick all the time. Now I never do. I'm never sick. And I go, you're probably just immune to everything now. And she goes, no, no, no. I'm telling you, I'm giving it to my young flight attendants. I just tell them that. Okay. So I had a bunch of makeup artists who were sick all the time. I go, hey, one of my patients swears by this stuff. That and oil of oregano, people would say. And then when you look at the effect of the gut microbiome, it kills off a lot of the bad gut microbiome. So maybe it's allowing your bifidobacterium, your immune response to come better, because we know in COVID, the people who were dying most of the time were metabolically sick with gut health and leaky gut and inflammation to start with. And so you have a delayed immune response, and then you got this big cytokine storm and all. So,
So
yeah.
in the delayed immune response, I'm going to tell you. So I'm actually working with a scientist from Australia who he founded the Department of Applied Mathematics at Australia National University, and he was a early pioneer in colloid science and working on surfactants. And okay, like what's a surfactant? Well, that's emulsifiers in food, but it's like the liquid soaps and all the stuff that you get in those products. Well, the work he did in 1985 showed that the surfactants in these soaps and cleaning products is immunosuppressant. And he went to Procter and Gamble and met with their scientists, showed them the science. This science has never been refuted. There are more recently, a few people have backed it up. And it is also connected in the mechanism of the lipid nanoparticle, also in the vaccine, but that it takes about 3 months for it to flip sides of the membrane and become immunosuppressant. So and his research showed that the surfactants were staying in the body up to 9 months. And he didn't know it at the time he was doing
Even though they're using it topically.
Yep. He didn't know at the time he was doing the research, and he's cleaning stuff in the lab and doing all this stuff. And he went home to Australia. He was doing the research at the University of Minnesota. And he went home to Australia and he had stage 4 bowel cancer. And they were like, you're toast. I mean, he's 89. So they removed part of his bowel, but, it's eating up it's affecting that lining and the structure of our cell membranes, and kind of turning off the intelligence of our immune system. So that is another thing.
So you're talking about working at the cell membrane level, not just the lining of the gut, like the surfactant in the gut.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's, I've started to tell people, like, you really need to look at what your cleaning products are and, pay attention to that, because if you just think about it, we're a collection of, lipid membranes.
Well, and the cell membranes are all made of cholesterol, right? So,
right.
Yeah, that's why I've never been a fan of saying, yeah, let's get the LDL down to 20 or less. And you go, that's going to have an effect in a lot of places in your
Well, the
body.
brain. I mean,
The
the brain
brain
is
is
mostly
unreal.
cholesterol.
Yeah.
It's mostly cholesterol.
Yeah, so these are all scary things because that and the research I'm seeing and is that if you have leaky gut, you also have leaky CNS, central nervous system,
Yeah.
endothelium is leaky, and you go, that's not a good combination.
No, it's not. And if you just like think about it, like Dawn, I mean, if you want to get rid of grease, you use Dawn dish detergent. But okay, you're a lipid membrane just like grease. Like,
Yeah.
maybe that's not a good
So what
idea.
do you do if you're clean washing? You just put them in the dishwasher. What do you do like to avoid
I
some of that?
don't, well, one of my customers actually told me about a enzyme cleaner it's basically citric acid. It's called Clean Green or something. So I use that. I've started using that. I
Or
do
you can wear
just,
gloves when you do your dishes.
yeah, or I just wash with hot water. I mean, water
Yeah.
is, the universal solvent. But grease can be challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for
I
sure.
think Castle soap actually is, I mean, that's more of a body soap. Well, but I use bar soap, so it
Hmm.
doesn't have the surfactants in it. And Castle soap apparently doesn't have those surfactants. And they've changed a lot of the names, so it's harder to tell, that it's a surfactant. So I've actually been working on trying to put together some kind of a comprehensive list of what ingredients to look for. It's like
Yeah, and
a landmine going to the store, or looking in your cabinet and trying to figure out, okay, how do I rescue myself from all this you know
and
toxic
well,
BS.
yeah, and it's interesting. Like a lot of the products you come up with, I would look at and go like Simple Slumber, like all these things when people are stressed, So it's probably using all those things in conjunction. Good when you're stressed, your gut microbiome gets screwed up. Like people don't get that fact, right? So, and your brain and your gut are looking at each other. There's tons of communication going back and forth. So, other things that you do that one of my patients chastised me because one of my friends didn't give her antibiotic antidote after she took a course of antibiotics. Like, how come they didn't do that? I was like, I don't know. I usually would. But how'd you come up with an antibiotic antidote for people who take antibiotics for urinary infection, for instance?
Well, I mean, that was actually an interesting process because there was a paper that came out of the Weitzman Institute that was looking at a probiotic. I mean, they didn't say it was a probiotic. They said 11 strains, but I looked at the 11 strains and went and found the probiotic in Israel that had those 11 strains. And that that particular probiotic actually made things worse after the antibiotics. And I think they were doing this study hoping that it would improve, but it didn't. And so Raul and I sat down and he looked at it and immediately he said, "Oh, I can tell you why. That makes the gut too acidic. And so it won't allow, for a broader recolonization." And so, went back to the drawing board, put a team together, and we have this computational model that sort of predicts how they interact over a period of time, and did that model. And then we kind of set it aside as we'll make this in the future, but it's something that's needed. And then one of my advisors, who was from the probiotics industry, his mom in her 80s had to have her appendix removed. And she got septic and was on antibiotics for a month. And then her gut was all messed up. She had always been really regular. And the doctor's like, yeah, it's just, that's just what it is. And, you're 80 something, don't worry about it. And, she was pretty upset about it. And Steve said, don't you have that antibiotic? Could you make that antibiotic antidote? And so, like, we kind of scurried around and made a small batch of 200 bottles for her to try. And she tried it and she was like, this is unbelievable. I'm not ever going without this, because within a month she was back to regularity. Her energy was back. She felt good. And so we ended up bringing that to market. And we did a little exercise of trying to go through dentists, and we need to go back and look at that again, because dentists are some of the biggest prescribers of prophylactic antibiotics for people. And,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
they really need to, if they're going to do that, they need to pair that with, you know, some sort of a recovery mechanism, because, you know, those antibiotics are indiscriminate. And there's actually some research in Parkinson's. So Philip Schepperhans, who had that first paper that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole, you know, I kept pressing him because I knew that people with Parkinson's, from my discussions with many of them over the years, many of them had had chronic strep infections as children and taken a lot of antibiotics. And I had also confirmed the connection with increased risk of Parkinson's with people who had 4 or more strep infections in childhood. 23andMe had done an analysis for me. And so I kept pushing Philip, and they have a national database where they can look at the history. And
Yeah.
they actually looked at the history, and there is an increased risk with certain antibiotics and certain antifungals within, you know, a certain number of doses within 5 or 10 years, and a Parkinson's diagnosis. So I'm also like, you know, antibiotics are great if you've got an acute infection, but it's not something you want to take indiscriminately. And then if you do take it, you need to kind of put the things in place to get that microbiome back in order.
Yeah, because some women, like, they get urinary infections recurrently, and their gut is a disaster. And the doctors don't even check anymore because they go, we don't want to wait for the culture, so we'll just treat you. So everything's treated, and then they start getting more and more urinary infections. Then their gut's messed up, and it's so rough that our mind says, like, let's just be safe and give you antibiotics instead of saying, let's be safe and not give you antibiotics this time to see how we do.
So, and the bacteria that are most often connected to those UTIs are the endotoxin producers.
Exactly.
And, you know, so, and D-mannitol, like, I mean, they
Yeah.
sometimes give, so it stops the attachment to the membrane. We also have a product called Ideal Immunity. I have an interesting story on that
Oh yeah.
because I have a physician in Hawaii who, he got something from one of his patients, like back in the 1970s, and he had chronic diarrhea for, like, from 1970s till he found us in the, you know, 2021. Maybe his daughter said, you have to try this. He said, it's not going to work. I've tried everything. I've tried every probiotic, you know, but he tried it. And within a month, he no longer had the chronic diarrhea. And then he, you know, so he stayed on it. Then he ran out and it came back. And he was like, okay, I got to and then he took the vaccine and the diarrhea came back. But about 2 or 3 months in, it turned back around. And I actually have a group of practitioners in Israel who use the sugar shift as part of their protocol for long COVID and vaccine injury. And I think that's also, I don't know if you've seen some of the research where they show that the gut bacteria might actually, like, pick up and be able to produce that spike protein.
Yeah, Sabine Hazen was the first that I saw talking about that because she was following people like you. She collects stool from everyone from all over, and they see what happens. And she was seeing pre and post, and she was seeing a 62% drop of bifidobacterium with each
Yeah.
shot. And you go, oh my gosh, that's not very good.
Yeah.
So that's your immune function, and surveillance for melanoma and pancreatic cancer and all these. And you go, that is not, like, people don't think about the gut. And I was seeing a lot of people with gut issues, and I'm like, why are they having gut issues all of a sudden? Like, it didn't make sense to me until I started looking at it, going, oh, maybe let's look at your gut and see what's going on. So yeah, it's amazing. You're in this area of medicine where we're going to have so many discoveries and so much we're going to learn. So love everything you're doing. And so how do people track you down and find you?
So you can find me. Our website is biotiquest.com. That's BIOTIQUEST.com. And then if you're interested in Parkinson's, I have a Parkinson's blog called Martha's Quest and a Substack called Martha's Quest, where the Substack, I write a little bit broader on some of these chemical things. And then the website Martha's Quest, I write about Parkinson's and alternative therapies and Parkinson's and the gut. But on BiotiQuest, I write a lot in our blog about keto and carnivore and how to support your gut through that, and just fermented foods and lots of interesting information. I think
Yeah, great
on our
resources,
blog.
great
Yeah.
blogs of if you have someone with Parkinson's, that's the way to go. Martha has been flying around the world figuring this stuff out. And so looking at the research, and I'll tell you, when I talk to people that are like in official Parkinson's capacities, they don't know anything about this stuff. They don't even consider it. They go, well, diet, we need to find the right drugs. It's like it's always that way. Instead of saying, what else can we do to support it? What should be the red flags? Like chronic constipation for years before getting the diagnosis. And so these are our little markers. So people ask me like, well, if that's just a well, maybe we can intervene. They're like, why? If you can't do anything about it, why find it early? So, well, lifestyle can make a difference
It
and
can make
different
a huge difference.
exercises.
And that's really my goal, is to get people to understand and these markers like the chronic constipation 10 to 15 years beforehand. That's waste with those toxins sitting in your body that your body keeps having to deal with. So if you deal with that 10 or 15 years ahead of the game, and you make sure that you are going regularly, then maybe you don't ever get Parkinson's.
Or maybe we delay it by 20 years,
Yeah.
instead of getting
Or
when you're
you,
50.
you avoid these things like the surfactants, or, the paraquat. There's paraquat, quat. So the name quat actually is quaternary ammonium compound. Those are surfactants. So a lot of these herbicides that are used on plants also are formulated with a surfactant.
Yeah,
So
and that
it's
quats,
kind
they
of,
use that like in all the hairdressers, or they're cleaning their brushes and combs and everything in quats, I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that is like, that's a big no-no, because it's a huge risk for your overall health and your immune system and your microbiome, the lining, everything.
So what's life's best medicine for you, Martha?
Life's best medicine, it's actually love. Love each other. The really hard part is loving your enemies, especially in this day and age. But I really try to practice that and be grateful for the people who love me, and the people who've touched my life. And I hope that I kind of radiate love to everybody I come across, because really I just want to help people.
Yeah, you do. And your knowledge and your drive to help others, because you could just be retired and relaxing and not worry about all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But having that thirst for knowledge and the love for people, I think that's a huge one. Because I was just thinking that yesterday. I said we have a heart problem in the United States, and it's not like heart disease I'm talking about, like having not a good heart of loving
Yes.
people and being loved and like being happy. And so I see a lot of negativity, and that affects your gut microbiome, people. It does. It
It
just does.
does.
And we see all this stuff, being stressed and tense and worried and not laughing and all those things. So, everyone
Well,
listening. Oh, go ahead.
L. reuteri is the love bug.
Yeah, yeah. El Ruderai,
Because
and there's ways you
it
can make it.
increases oxytocin, and if you talk to Bill Davis, it also makes you more tolerant of people with different opinions. So, like, get some reuteri and show the love.
Absolutely. And all these things that we start seeing, and one thing I was going to show you, because I was surprised when I looked at it, progesterone levels, like when you fix the gut microbiome, progesterone levels go up, and when progesterone levels go up, they help make more butyrate, and you go, wow, all these things like kind of maybe that's why when we go through menopause we get a little grumpy with people and can't sleep, and and then we fix the one of those problems that are missing, and those things start getting better. So I mean, we're on the forefront of this stuff. It just takes time to figure it all out and put all the pieces together. But that's why it's great having people like you saying, hey, here's the research, try this clinically and see what happens. So that's why I love using your products for my patients and say, let's see what your sugars do with this. Let's see how you feel. Let's get your gut a little better. If we're giving you antibiotics, let's take this. There's at least something we can do rather than saying, oh, when you get your yeast infection, we'll give you an antifungal. Then we're going to give you this for this side effect of the antifungal. And we go down this road. So I'd rather have healthy patients. Yeah, exactly. So oh, I know you have another podcast to do, and I got to get to patients. So it's Martha. It's always awesome to see you, and I know you're going to come up with new stuff, and then we'll have to have you back on to talk about it. But keep up the good fight and all you're doing, and everyone listening, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Martha gave you the best advice ever. Love people. Don't get upset. Be grateful for what you got. Don't worry about what someone who has a better car than you and all that stuff. It just destroys your gut microbiome and your insulin levels and all that stuff. So, Martha, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me again, Brian. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.